Imagine a place, right, once just synonymous with really tough problems, poverty, crime, corruption, completely turned around. I mean, a place where the police station actually closes for the weekend because there's, well, simply no crime. Sounds like pure fantasy, doesn't it? Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a vision that dares to dream exactly that. Okay, let's unpack this. We're looking into Hansie Louw's manuscript, The Miracle of Khayelitsha, Revival of a Lost City. And what makes this so different is that it's not history. It's written as if looking back from the year 2119, describing a transformation that the author believes will happen. It's like a blueprint almost sent back from the future.
Exactly. And Charlton Wick's introduction, it really sets a stark stage, paints a vivid, almost grim picture of Khayelitsha's past. A community just plagued by theft, deception, corruption that was everywhere, violent crime. He even shares this harrowing personal story about facing down a pistol during an ambush. It just highlights the danger people lived with. So, yeah, it's not just some hopeful wish. It's presented as a radical answer to really deep societal brokenness. And they argue it's relevant everywhere, really.
Right. So our mission today is to dig into the specific, sometimes pretty surprising ideas and insights from this blueprint. We'll look at the proposed changes, governance, economy, culture, individual lives, and, try to understand the principles that are meant to turn Khayelitsha into this lamp and beacon for the whole of Africa and the world, as they put it. Let's see how this radical shift is supposed to happen according to the text. Okay, so let's start with that central, really audacious dream. Khayelitsha becoming this thriving modern city by 2119, and a huge piece of this future, as described, is the Church of 247. Now, for many listening, the idea of a church driving huge societal change might seem unexpected. How does the manuscript see this Church of 247 working? And what's this throne room concept?
Well, the manuscript calls it a throne room. That's a specific term, often meaning a place where God's presence is felt really strongly, like in the Bible. Here, it's pictured as a place where people from all over come to pray and praise nonstop. The goal, fostering this really intimate connection with God. It's not just a building. It's described as this massive, unified spiritual hub, big enough for 30,000 people. And it does more than just worship. It's a training center for musicians, leaders, a place for constant ministry to the community. So it signals this profound spiritual refocus for the whole community, where spiritual life is literally nonstop, foundational to everything else.
And the manuscript claims the spiritual shift has real, tangible results. Like, it describes a future Khayelitsha celebrating its 10th year without a single murder. They even mark it with something called Enoch and Makito Day.
Yeah.
That's incredibly ambitious. How does the manuscript explain the practical steps? How do they get from a high-crime area to zero murders beyond just the spiritual aspect?
That's a really important point, because the manuscript does try to outline the how. It's not just stating the outcome. This isn't just crime reduction. It's presented as a complete societal turnaround. The text says police stations, for example, have very little crime to deal with. Their focus actually shifts more towards community help, upliftment, that kind of thing. And it argues that the deep void associated with abuse, which it sees as a root cause of problems, gets filled through spiritual means. Things like widespread inner healing from trauma, taking personal responsibility, a community-wide spiritual awakening. And the authors claim this leads to the rapid, almost overnight disappearance of things like chronic alcoholism, child abuse, suggesting a fundamental shift in the moral fabric and how people behave.
Okay, so part of that moral strengthening involved a radical change in how the community governs itself. These miracle committees replacing the old street committees.
Yeah.
That sounds like a fundamental change in organization. What were the old committees like, according to the manuscript, and how are these miracle committees different?
Yeah, the manuscript draws a sharp contrast. The old street committees are described as being very problem-focused, and in the author's view, kind of influenced by what they call a socialist communist idealism, which the text frames as this idea that the state should provide for everyone. The manuscript argues this led to, stagnation, lack of initiative, even opportunism. But the new miracle committees, they're presented as prayer-based, solution-driven. They're apparently trained to actively see and expect the miracles of God in practical terms. Their task was practical but spiritually grounded. Things like spiritual mapping, identifying and dealing with what they see as negative spiritual influences, and cleansing the land through prayer. They also work directly with vulnerable parents, supporting them towards transformation. Plus, the manuscript says they set up a swift community justice system. Penalties like paying back 7 times what was stolen, hard labor for serious stuff. And the claim is this was so effective that drug lords actually packed up and left Khayelitsha, a real restoration of order.
Wow. So this huge shift in spirit and governance then leads to a dramatic economic turnaround, the manuscript says. The vision is individuals moving from recipient to giver. You mentioned specific examples of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely. The manuscript really highlights these personal stories. There's Sindaswat Nagthut starts by getting a bid donated, ends up running a profitable creche. Her brother owns 3 taxis. Then Nosifo Jalali selling vet coke, the fried dough, starts small, expands to 300 shops across the country, gets investors, and Mrs. Koliwi Pike uses her sewing skills to build a huge 5,000 garment rental business. These stories, according to the text, show that deep shift away from dependency, from just receiving, towards creating robust, sustainable income, the key ingredients, an awakened sense of purpose, strong work ethic fueled by faith, and community structures that actually encourage and guide entrepreneurs.
And it's not just individuals. The manuscript talks about corporations as transformation partners. That sounds like more than just standard CSR, corporate social responsibility. How does the book see companies weaving spiritual guidance right into their day-to-day operations? What are the claimed results?
This is a really unique part of the vision, yeah. It depicts corporations actively hiring pastors, serving in the workplace, and these aren't just chaplains for pastoral care. They're described as hearing God's voice for the company, like discerning divine guidance for strategy, decisions, even product ideas. They also minister to employees' needs, both emotional and physical, making spiritual care part of the work environment. The manuscript actually points to another book, The Supernatural in the Workplace, claiming it documents actual miracles in business success because of this approach. And it's not just about internal stuff, it's also a funding engine. The profits from these spiritually guided businesses get channeled back into the community, into things like Montessori-based schools. And these schools don't just teach kids discipline and self-worth, they employ parents from the community, give them work, teach financial literacy. It completely challenges that typical separation of faith and business, showing them as deeply linked for the community's good.
So corporations become active players, not just donors. And this changed mindset also leads to new business strategies, right? New ways of growing.
Exactly. The manuscript highlights a big shift in how entrepreneurs operate. Instead of just competing against each other, they start bidding together for contracts as a unit. They pool resources, capital, people overcoming challenges that small businesses often face alone. It reflects moving from a scarcity mindset, thinking there's not enough to go around, to an abundance mindset, fostering real trust and collaboration. The vision even gets into tapping an untapped source of ideas directly from God for inventions, things like air flush toilets, even transcorder machines are mentioned, suggesting divine inspiration for practical, real-world innovation. And there's that great example of Victor's security firm. Crime drops so low.
Right. What happens to the guards?
Instead of being laid off, they retrain. They become educators, community peacekeepers. It shows this incredible adaptability, which the manuscript links back to this purpose-driven economic view.
Okay, so the transformation covers governance, economy, but the manuscript says it's also deeply personal. It extends to what it calls abundant health. What does that mean?
Yeah, abundant health here means both physical and spiritual well-being. The manuscript shares stories, like a police officer supposedly recovering from a stroke after prayer, highlighting physical healing through faith. But it also stresses practical community-wide changes, like regular community runs for fitness, adopting healthier, cheaper food options. Fish is mentioned specifically, a general move towards people taking ownership of their health. The vision describes clinics actually emptying because people are healthier, preventing illness through better lifestyles and, well, spiritual vitality instead of just reacting to sickness. It's painted as a complete turnaround in public health.
And beyond physical health, it talks about healing the whole in the soul. That sounds like getting into deeper emotional and psychological healing. How does that happen?
That scene is absolutely crucial. The manuscript argues these holes in the soul, deep emotional scars, trauma, are major drivers of social problems. So people are actively encouraged to build trusting relationships, to share their pain and find inner healing, often explicitly with the help of the Holy Spirit, according to the text. And this focus on healing directly tackles big issues from Khayelitsha's past, especially the problem of absent fathers. The idea is, as men find their own healing and purpose, it naturally leads to families functioning well.
And there's a specific example of that family transformation, Litha Halonipa launching a Best Father Award. How does something like an award contribute to this family revolution?
The Best Father Award competition is presented as more than just an award. It's a catalyst. It's about actively encouraging men, holding up examples, pushing them to be faithful, active, teaching, hope-giving, positive, reliable role models, not just for their kids, but for the whole community. The manuscript basically says this revolution in fatherhood rebuilds families from the foundation up, providing stability, guidance, a new sense of identity for children. Strong, present fathers are shown as key to breaking those cycles of poverty and dysfunction.
Which then shapes the culture. The manuscript talks about a Khayelitsha where Ubuntu and Jesus intertwine. Now, Ubuntu is a concept many might know, but what is Jesus-like Ubuntu as the manuscript defines it?
Yeah, the text is careful here. It's not just romanticizing Ubuntu or seeing it just through a Western lens or even a purely traditional one. It describes a Jesus-like Ubuntu, lending Ubuntu's core ideas of interconnectedness, humanity towards others, collective well-being, with the specific teachings and values of Jesus. The authors argue this creates an even deeper respect, dignity, unconditional love, and self-worth, shaping the whole culture. It fosters a society where, your individual purpose is tied to everyone flourishing together.
Yeah.
It elevates both the person and the community.
Okay, and perhaps the deepest level of personal change mentioned is understanding people operating in redemptive gifts. That sounds quite specific theologically. What are these redemptive gifts? How are they different from, say, gifts of the Holy Spirit?
Right, it is a nuanced concept in the manuscript. They're described as distinct wiring from God the Father, more like innate temperaments or ways you're predisposed to operate, rather than supernatural abilities you receive. The manuscript lists 7: prophet, perceiver, servant, teacher, exhorter, giver, ruler, and mercy. And the author specifically distinguishes these from the gifts of the Holy Spirit, like healing, prophecy, which are often seen as empowerments for ministry. These redemptive gifts are presented as more fundamental to your personality, how you naturally contribute. And the manuscript argues that understanding your gift and others fosters grace and unity. You appreciate how different people contribute instead of judging them. This understanding is also said to bring unity amongst churches. Denominations start focusing on shared principles, working together against secularism, and promoting what they call social justice, the way of Jesus.
There's a really powerful story illustrating this depth. Petrea forgiving her brother's killer, even though he never asked for forgiveness. What does that story convey?
Yeah, Petrea's story is presented as a profound example. She forgives him, unsolicited. And according to the manuscript, this act is so powerful, it actually leads to the killer confessing and changing his life. It's shown as more than just personal healing for her. It demonstrates how even the deepest societal pain, like murder, can be addressed and healed at the root through these spiritual principles. It showcases how acts of, radical grace and forgiveness, as described in the blueprint, can break cycles of violence and bring reconciliation, leading to real, lasting change.
So ultimately, this whole blueprint seems to circle back to some fundamental questions for the individual listener for you. What are those core questions?
Yes, the manuscript really boils it down to 3 vital questions for you. Who are you? Whose are you? Which, in this context, means belonging to Jesus, and what is God's purpose for your life?
Yeah.
It's all about cultivating a life where you actively try to hear and obey God's voice, seeking guidance in everything. The authors contend that by embracing this, you move beyond dependency, beyond thinking there's not enough, to what they call total provision, through a complete biblical worldview that touches every single part of life.
Wow. We've certainly covered an extraordinary vision of transformation today, detailed in this manuscript, from, the grim realities of decay to this proposed, vibrant, crime-free, prosperous, spiritually rich new home.
And it's so important to remember, as the manuscript itself says quite clearly, this is a story written while the change in Khayelitsha has not happened yet. It's not history. It's a bold declaration of what the authors believe is possible through faith, through dedicated human cooperation, through following these specific spiritual principles. It's a vision cast for the future.
Which really leaves us with a powerful question for you, the listener. What seemingly impossible transformation maybe in your own life, your family, your neighborhood, your community might just be waiting for your belief, your cooperation, your connection perhaps to that untapped source of ideas the manuscript talks about. Maybe the miracle, whatever it looks like for you, is simply waiting for you to begin, maybe by asking those 3 questions. Imagine a